Today, it's all about easy painted tissue paper, and I'm bringing you along as I explore translucency and texture. I'm Jackie Bernardi, and welcome to my studio. I had a completely different video planned for today, but the spring air is so beautiful and light. I just wanted to get in here and paint some tissue paper, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. What I have here is a piece of freezer paper. It's poly-coated freezer paper, and I am painting a piece of wet strength tissue paper with water right now. I'm getting it soaking wet. I've got the shiny side of the freezer paper up and the wet strength tissue paper on top of it. And the reason for that is once I start putting paint down on this tissue paper, like I just did with the light phthalo blue, when it dries, it won't stick to the paper. The poly coating makes it possible for me to peel even super delicate tissue paper, to peel it right off without any problems. It's also a great way to transport the wet paper to wherever you're going to take it to dry. So I just put on a couple of drops of the Interference Gold by Golden, and I'm hitting it with some water in my continuous spray bottle. And what that's doing is it's making the paint move around easily. I'm going for several different things here, but primarily I'm going for translucency and texture. I just sprayed on a little bit of Seth Apter's dye spray. They're called Inks, and you can get them on his site. I'll make sure that the link to everything is in the description. But it added just a nice little aging thing to it, and I think it's pretty cool looking, actually. It sort of looks like a world map to me right now. But one of the really great things about painting with water this way and the acrylic paints, the paper that you use tends to lift up off of the poly-coated paper in interesting ways. And then as it dries, those areas where it lifted up create incredible textures, which you'll see in just a little bit. But right now I'm continuing on. I'm using a somewhat limited color palette today. It's not all blues and golds. We're going to be using some other colors also, but I just wanted to get started. Again, this is wet strength tissue paper that I'm using at the moment, but I will also be using medical exam paper. And the reason why I'm using these two papers instead of just regular tissue paper is because they're very durable and they stand up to all the water. Okay, so I don't have to hold myself back in terms of the amount of water I use. This here, I'm going to interrupt myself for a second. This here is some of the brown poly-coated craft paper, and it does the exact same thing as the white freezer paper does. The poly coating makes it so that the tissue won't stick permanently to the paper below it. And the reason why I switched to the brown paper is it just lays more flat while I'm working, and it's easier to film so you can see. Uh, but as I was saying, using these two types of papers, I'm pretty much guaranteed that I will not tear or rip the paper that I'm painting on. And I can use a lot of water. I can get beautiful, dreamy effects by using that. So those are the two papers that I prefer to use. You can try this with regular tissue paper. I would just be very, very careful when you do it. So I'm lifting it up. You can see there's quite a bit of smeared paint on the brown paper. That's like a bonus that you'll see at the end. I love that that happens. But I lifted the paper up and then set it back down to ensure that I would get some air bubbles underneath it, because that's part of what makes the beautiful texture once this dries. And again, you'll see that later. I'm just using different tools. This is a big brushy brush. I'm using a fan brush here to lay down some of this Nova copper Again, everything will be linked to down in the description, but I'm just spreading it about. I could use any brush. It just happened to be a fan brush next to me, so I grabbed it. And I want a little more metallic in there. So I put down some of the interference gold. I'll tell you, this looks very intense right now. When these dry, they tend to dry much lighter than what you see while they're wet. And although acrylic paints usually dry a little bit darker, this technique, and I think it's because of all the water that I'm using, this technique, it dries much lighter. So where it may look like a lot of metallic right now, when it dries, it'll be this gorgeous, almost like a misting of the metallics, and I like that. And that technique that you just saw me do where I folded the paper back onto itself to move the paint around, if you watched my other tissue paper painting video, which I will link to in the description as well, I learned that technique, um, while I was creating that video. And it's a great way of moving paint around in a really organic way. Just pulling the paper, the very wet paper, back on itself moves the paint in curious ways. And I love that. So here I am adding some Van Dyke Brown, and the paper that is on the craft paper right now is not the wet strength tissue paper. That's actually medical exam paper that I'm working with right now. And what we know about both wet strength tissue paper and medical exam paper is that using a very specific formula, when you use these papers in collage, they can go completely transparent, or the wet strength tissue paper goes translucent. But that's the reason why I'm choosing to use these papers today, because ultimately what I want to use them for is collage. And I would like to be able to use many, many, many layers of these papers and build up the texture and the translucency by using multiple layers to create a sense of depth and history in a way that we couldn't do with just regular solid painted papers. When I was working on the oyster collage in my sketchbook, again, I'll link to that video in the description. The whole time I was working on it, I really loved the way that it came out, but the whole time I was thinking, I wish I had many different shades of this color or that color that I could lay on top of each other, that were transparent, that I could build up what I want to do here. I was really sad that I didn't have painted papers, painted transparent and translucent papers that I could use during that time. So as I'm working up to creating that 6-foot oyster painting collage, that 6-foot oyster collage, I'm I'm very conscious of creating some translucent papers and transparent papers as I go, so that once I really start working on it, I have the whole stash of papers that I could use to get the effect that I am actually looking for. Now, this here is getting me really excited. I love this combination of the Van Dyke Brown and the light phthalo blue. Uh, Again, like I said, everything will dry a little lighter than what you're seeing here, but I like pushing it. I like that it's pretty dark, and I also like that it bleeds down into this blue and it creates this, I don't know. I love. The way it is right this moment, I truly love this. There's something mystical about it. It is a bit too wet, so I just threw down some medical exam paper on top, and I'm pretty much letting the water and the paint below it absorb into the paper without me manipulating it too much. I'm just barely touching it there, and I love that. So this is super transparent. That little piece of paper that I pulled off, you'll see later on, when I use that in collage, it will go completely transparent, but I'll have those really gorgeous qualities of the super light phthalo blue and a lightened version of the Van Dyke brown. Now this is Blick's fluid acrylic, and this is Azo yellow, and, it's a pretty intense yellow. I mean, pretty intense, um, but it mellows out pretty nicely, as I go through this, and, also once it's dry, you'll see it's a very pretty yellow, whereas here it looks harsh. To me, it looks harsh, but it blends out and fades out in a really beautiful way. Now you can see I am not afraid of using a lot of water here. I mean, tons of it. So much so that, again, I have to grab some more medical exam paper to sop up some of the residual. It would be fine if I didn't do that. It would just take longer to dry. And I'm trying to get this whole thing filmed in one day because this was not the video I had planned for you today. And so this was a last minute decision. I was totally enthralled by the spring-like weather that we're having that I just wanted to get here and work wet. So anyway, so sometimes I get the paper completely wet before I start, and sometimes I don't. There's no rhyme or reason. I'm just following my intuition here on what to do next. And this time it said add in some Payne's Gray, which had not been part of the original color palette for this. It's just something in me said it's time to grab Payne's Gray and just put it down. This time I applied the paint differently. I used a silicone paint shaper and kind of tapped it around and then hit it with more water to move it around. I also added some of that interference gold, and I'm just letting it drip and move and create its own shapes and patterns. I love Payne's Gray so much. Oh gosh. There are certain colors that truly just move me. Now, what you saw me do right there was add some gold on top of the medical exam paper that I was really just using to sop up the paper below. So, this is the great thing about this technique. You get almost like ghost prints when you're gel printing. You get ghost papers from the paper that you use to sop up the excess water and paint, and that's, to me, super exciting. And again, following my intuition, I just grabbed some of my quinacridone Nicolazzo Gold and threw that on here. Uh, I'm loving the contrast between the Payne's Gray and this. I think they're a brilliant color combination anyway, but I particularly like what's happening here. I'm going to see if I can zoom in and show you how the texture underneath is building up because of the air pockets below the paper and the craft paper. Love that. Now, what you see me doing over to the side is I have a full-sized sheet pan, like an industrial full-size sheet pan that I got from Amazon. And I'm stacking all of the wet papers on the craft paper on top of each other, and then I'm gonna take them outside because it's such a beautiful day. I'm gonna take them outside in a bit so they can dry, and I'm just using that giant tray as transport, but sometimes you've seen me use it for a lot of different things, and I actually sometimes use it when I am creating these super wet tissue paper paintings. I didn't today because I'm not working terribly large today, but when I use a full sheet of the wet strength tissue paper, which I think is 30 by, I don't know what the dimensions are, but it's a very large sheet. When I work that way, I actually paint inside the sheet pan, just to keep the water from going everywhere, and it's a really fun way to work. This here is quinacridone magenta. I'm gonna have to check that. Just check in the description. I'll have the proper colors there. But, I I felt that pink was really missing from my springtime feeling. So, I grabbed it, I threw it down here. I love what's happening here. These are exciting colors for me, the combination of the light phthalo blue and the magenta. I love that. And this print, I can already tell, this print, I'm calling it a print. It is a print, actually, that's coming off the medical exam paper is stunning. And I can already think of uses for that. Mm, love it. Again, it's sort of dreamy type quality. Ugh, I don't know. These colors totally make me think of spring. And I love that I was inspired to use them today, actually. I'm going to use Titan Buff, and Titan Buff is quite opaque. So even though I'm using it, I'm going to make sure I super water it down because I don't really want opacity. I do want contrast, but not so much opacity. So you'll see in a moment when I use the Titan Buff that I really, really water it down. And I'm just using the brush here to just move these colors around. No rhyme or reason. Um, yeah, you can see that the Titan Buff is going on very thin, but it's still holding its quality of Titan Buff. Like, you can tell that there's a warm white on the page as opposed to just, white white. And I love the pink that it made, when mixed with the magenta. It's love it. This is a little more painterly than I normally go with the wet tissue paper, and I quite like it, actually. This might be something I wanna explore with the larger sheets of wet strength tissue paper. I mean, I'm not really trying to do a painting here, but I'm enjoying the process of doing this. And one of the things that I'm noticing is just the action of moving the brush across the very wet paper is creating that lift that I was talking about earlier that creates the air bubbles underneath the wet strength tissue paper. And that when it dries will create this incredible texture that you can even see the texture right now while it's wet. It gets even better as it dries. This was a this was fun. This piece was fun, and I am going to have to explore a more painterly version of painting tissue papers later. I enjoyed that quite a lot. So I let these dry for about an hour and a half. It really is a beautiful day here. It's about 75 degrees and the sun's out, and it was just perfect conditions for drying everything. And because it's tissue paper, it does dry pretty quickly anyway. So now I'm just going to do a walkthrough of what these are dry. And some of them are very light. It will be challenging to see the nuances, but this is the point. This is why I want these papers. When you're building up a color in collage and you're using translucency and transparency as an element in creating that texture and that buildup. It's really important that you have all levels of translucency from barely there whisper to really intense, and that's why I was doing this today. I wanted a variety of the translucency or the transparency, depending on the paper. Love it. And see what I mean? The yellow, it mellowed. It didn't dry the same yellow that it was when it was wet, if that makes sense. And that particular paper was so wet that even the Van Dyke Brown went completely mellow. Not the prettiest paper, but that paper will be probably used more than the pretty papers. That is what I would consider a workhorse paper. This magenta is so good. It's particularly the sheet that I use to blot the water and the paint, the sheet to the right. Uh, I'm wild about that, and I can't wait to start using that in projects. This one here is really interesting. Well, first off, I can show you here. This one is really interesting. The texture here is spectacular. The colors aren't anything necessarily to write home about, except again, like that yellow and Van Dyke Brown one, the last one. There's a million ways that this piece of paper will be used, probably more so than the intense ones. And I just threw those numbers under there so you can see the translucency that I'm talking about. Because I'm not using these papers today, I wanted to be able to show you that these really are translucent and transparent. Maybe next week I will be using these in next week's video. Yeah, like this one, it's so subtle. This was the one that was all the metallic with a little bit of the blue. And see, it doesn't read as metallic. It just reads as um, dreamy. Dreamy. There's some good texture. You can see it on the brown craft paper. Here's the great news about that. Brown paper can be reused, and we can actually lift that print that's on there now onto other paper, and I will show you that next week. This piece here, this was the one that I said it felt like a map of the world to me when it was wet. This is so beautiful, I can barely stand it. I am telling you, the camera is not capturing it the way that I am seeing it, but look at the gorgeous texture that's left over on the paper. Again, I will be using that, and you'll see me use it. I'll lift that is what I'm trying to say. But this is heavenly. I know that's a little on the nose, but honest to gosh, this is just the texture is beautiful. Both sides of this piece of paper are absolutely stunning. I can't wait to find a reason to use that. And then here is the painterly piece, and the paper that it was drying on left beautiful texture, absolutely stunning texture. As you look through the piece, every time I've looked at it since I've made it today, I've picked up on different things texture-wise for it. Beautiful. And that's it. Easy breezy day, perfect intro to spring, light. It wouldn't take you any time to do this and have fabulous results. Thank you so much for being with me today. I'll see you next time.